and we can let him in. Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday. Welcome to our latest morning meeting. Letting folks load from the waiting room right now. Good morning. Good morning. We're super excited to have Health Policy Institute of Ohio here today. Before we kick it off with their presentation, I'll just give a really quick budget update. We are excited to share that public testimony will be starting next week in the House Children and Human Services Committee. So on Tuesday, we can anticipate Director Wente coming back with her budget testimony. And then there are some breakouts around different content areas related to children on the 26th and 27th. We anticipate Groundwork will likely be testifying on the 27th. They will have additional public testimony hearings on the 4th and 5th of March in that committee. And our team has developed a testimony toolkit with a template as well that we'll be posting to our website and happy to share with folks so that if you're interested in sharing your own testimony, we'll try to get you set up for success. Just a note that the chair does appreciate testimony 24 hours prior to the committee hearing. And there's a witness slip to be completed as well. That's really just your contact information and a headline about what you're talking about. The Senate will begin hearing operating budget testimony the week of March 25th. So they'll start with the Legislative Service Commission, Office of Budget Management, and major state agencies, just like the full House Finance Committee did as well. And our advocacy day is March 12th, right in the middle of the House Finance Committee's public testimony. So lots of testimony opportunities happening over the coming few weeks. You may have seen our announcement. Our advocacy day is, unfortunately, well, fortunately, it's good. We're excited. There's so much enthusiasm and excitement about kids that we have hit maximum capacity earlier than we anticipated. But our team will throw the link in the chat. There is a wait list, and we would really encourage you to join on. Folks do have travel arrangements fall through, and we will be filling those slots to get folks in the room. We're going to be mindful of geographic diversity. We've got somebody registered in every single Senate district, which is really incredible. We're working to say the same for the House. And we are also going to have another opportunity for folks to engage that day who can't be there in person with us. So please do sign up if you haven't yet on the wait list and you would like to engage with us that day, even if it's from afar. Next week, we'll have a social media training with Marty Ridley on our team. So please dial in for the morning meeting next Thursday at 9:30 a.m. Her content is going to be super helpful, not just for Advocacy Day, but for your advocacy and mission work beyond. And we also will have a training on March 4th, a webinar format training for our advocacy day. You don't have to be attending to join. I think there will still be lots of useful tips and tricks around budget advocacy this season that day. Without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce our friends from HPIO, Becky Carrol, who we were just reminiscing. I've known since we were staffers together back in the Senate in 2000 and something. Becky started with HPIO in 2016 and leads project issues such as population health, healthcare spending, equity, and social drivers of health. Becky has specific expertise in health policies surrounding children and was the primary author on HPIO's connections between education and health policy brief series, as well as much of HPIO's work on the adverse childhood experiences that brief that came out in the fall that caused me to reach out and ask them to join us today initially. She now leads the organization's work on children and youth mental health as Director of Policy Research and Analysis. Before Becky was at HPIO, she worked in the legislature as well as the executive branch here in the state and at a national health policy consulting firm. Becky has her master's of public administration from OSU and her bachelor's in business administration and mathematics from Bowling Green State University. I'm also excited to introduce June Postalakis, who is an assistant policy analyst at Health Policy Institute of Ohio, and she works specifically on projects related to adverse childhood experiences, equity, older adults, criminal justice, and the social drivers of health. June also worked as an intern at Columbus Public Health before she joined HPIO and was a research assistant at Ohio State University. She completed her undergraduate thesis on reproductive coercion in Kingston, Jamaica, and June earned her bachelor's degree at OSU in public health with a specialization in sociology and a minor in public policy. Thank you both so much for joining us today. They've got the control of the screen to do slides. If you've got questions, feel free to throw them in the chat, and we'll save a few minutes at the end, as we typically do, for folks to come off mute as well. Thank you and good morning.
Thanks, Brittany. Well, good morning, everyone. As Brittany said, my name is Becky Carrol. I'm the Director of Policy Research and Analysis at the Health Policy Institute of Ohio. We are very excited to be with you today. Very quickly, for those of you who might be unfamiliar with HPIO, we are a independent and nonpartisan organization. Our mission is to advance evidence-informed policies that improve health, achieve equity, and lead to sustainable healthcare spending in Ohio. HPIO's work really centers on data and research evidence and bringing these important things into policymaking conversations. Here are our core funders who advance our mission with their steadfast investments in our work. As Brittany mentioned, I'm joined in today's presentation by my colleague June Postalakis, who you'll be hearing from in just a couple of minutes. Again, we're so excited to be here with you today to share our work related to ACE's protective factors. Given that it's state operating budget time, there's a chance that you might be wondering what exactly to advocate for. While we want you to come away from today's presentation with a few specific evidence-informed policy recommendations to build protective factors among Ohio children and families. Throughout the presentation, June and I are going to be pointing out provisions of Governor DeWine's executive budget and parts of Groundwork Ohio's policy agenda that support protective factors. But first, we'll do a little bit of background just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are potentially traumatic events that occur during childhood. National data and analysis provide clear evidence that ACEs exposure is linked to poorer health and well-being through adulthood, including challenges related to disrupted neurodevelopment, challenges related to social and emotional skill functioning, disease, disability, and even premature death. And generally, the more ACEs a child is exposed to, the greater the risk of these poor health outcomes. Research literature generally groups ACEs into these three categories: abuse, household challenges, and neglect. However, there is some variation among researchers on what is considered to be an ACE. Some also include experiences like homelessness, experiencing neighborhood violence, and racism and discrimination. But the ACEs shown here have been the focus of our analysis at HPIO. This is data from 2021. It's for Ohio adults thinking back and responding to questions about their childhood. So in 2021, we see that 69% of Ohio adults reported exposure to one or more ACEs during their childhood. And 47%, almost half, reported two or more. So the takeaway here is that ACEs are very prevalent. We also know that there are some groups of Ohioans who are more likely than others to experience ACEs. When disaggregated by race and ethnicity, we see that Black non-Hispanic Ohioans are more likely to have been exposed to two or more ACEs than these other racial groups. And so are Ohioans with the lowest incomes. We also see higher rates of ACEs among children with special health care needs and children living in foster care or with kinship caregivers. We have also analyzed data on some health impacts of ACEs. So for example, Ohioans who have been exposed to 2 or more ACEs are almost twice as likely to report being a current smoker as Ohioans with no ACEs exposure. And those exposed to 2 or more ACEs are more than 3 times as likely to report having depression. So these examples highlight 2 of the many negative health outcomes that have been linked to ACEs exposure. Of course, ACEs can be traumatic, but the harms associated with ACEs are not inevitable. Protective factors are positive experiences, resources, and assets that can buffer children and families against the harmful effects of ACEs. Protective factors are also associated with improved health, mental health, and well-being, and are really valuable for all people throughout life. So keep in mind that a lot of the protective factors that you'll hear about today are also beneficial for parents. And of course, we know that the well-being of parents is critical to the well-being of young children. Protective factors exist at the societal, community, interpersonal, and individual levels. And protective factors at all of these levels are important, especially for those who have experienced multiple ACEs. June and I are going to be talking about each of these levels in today's presentation. But first, I wanted to mention that when we think about preventing and mitigating the impacts of ACEs, we need to focus both on promoting protective factors and also reducing risk factors. So this slide shows a few examples of each. And the community level protective factors are really foundational, and their existence is often necessary for protective factors at the interpersonal and individual levels to be established. So now I'm going to turn it over to June, and she's going to describe some of these community level protective factors.
Thanks, Becky. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So research shows that supportive communities with access to needed resources can prevent and mitigate the impacts of ACEs. So access to necessary resources and supports at the community level, including all of those on this slide, enable parents and caregivers to provide a safe, stable, and nurturing environment for their children. Next slide, please. So I'll start off by introducing the Pair of ACEs framework. We can imagine adverse childhood experiences as a tree, including ACEs such as divorce, incarceration, homelessness, substance abuse. However, we know that ACEs do not exist in isolation, but they are rooted in adverse community environments, which we can consider the soil. Adverse community environments such as poverty, discrimination, violence, and lack of opportunity can lay the foundation for exposure to ACEs during childhood. Next slide. We can consider community-level protective factors as positive community environments that can prevent ACEs. So one of these community-level protective factors is economic opportunity. This includes factors such as sufficient income, employment, stable housing, and we know that when these basic needs are not met, it is much more difficult for families to thrive and for parents and caregivers to provide a nurturing and supportive environment for their children. Next slide. Data shows that many Ohio families are not earning enough to afford the basics, but earn too much to receive any kind of government assistance. So that's that 25% on this pie chart. We see that 40% of families, regardless of their ability to receive assistance, are not earning enough to afford basic necessities, let alone to spend money on luxuries. Next slide. This figure shows how wages compare to what an Ohioan would need to earn a 2-bedroom unit in the state. So we can see that although these occupations earn above the minimum wage, it is still not enough to afford a 2-bedroom apartment at fair market rent. These numbers and the ones on the previous slide show how many Ohio families face barriers to providing a safe, nurturing environment based on their access to economic resources. Next slide. Another community-level protective factor is access to quality and affordable medical care, medical homes, and needed mental health services. This is important for both parents and children. Next slide. Safe, supportive neighborhoods are another example of a protective factor. So this can mean neighborhoods in which people have relationships and look after one another, where there's a sense of solidarity, and people are willing to intervene on behalf of the common good. So that's all defined as collective efficacy. Research shows that positive social norms and collective efficacy within a community can maximize the likelihood that neighborhoods are a safe place for children to grow and learn without experiencing trauma and discrimination. Research also shows that it tends to be more challenging to develop collective efficacy in neighborhoods characterized by economic deprivation and residential instability. Next slide. Access to high-quality childcare and early childhood education is also a protective factor. We know that stable, consistent childcare providers have a protective effect, as do positive student-teacher relationships later in life. Additionally, early childhood education programs have been found to prevent and mitigate ACEs and have strong evidence of return on investment. Next slide. So there are many opportunities right now for Ohio policymakers to take action and protect against ACEs. Policymakers can implement tax credits and income supports to reduce financial stress for families with lower incomes. So for example, for this year's biennial budget, Governor DeWine proposed a refundable child tax credit, which presents a tremendous opportunity for state policymakers to prevent ACEs and improve family financial security. Other policy options include implementing supportive workplace policies, such as paid family leave, and community violence prevention programs to make communities safer places for children to learn and grow. Additionally, the legislature can also support Governor DeWine's proposed increased eligibility for publicly funded childcare to 200% of the federal poverty level. This would effectively increase access to this important protective factor in early stages of life. So now that we've gone over this, I'll pass it back to Becky to discuss protective factors at the interpersonal level.
All right, so as June said, now we're going to jump into some interpersonal level protective factors. Both family and non-family relationships are important protective factors and are essential for overall health and well-being of children, and really for all people throughout life. Having an adult, such as a parent, grandparent, or other caregiver that makes a child feel safe and takes care of their basic needs is the most important protective factor that we came across in our research. Research shows that children exposed to 4 or more ACEs who grow up with these stable, nurturing relationships have better mental and overall self-reported health. An HPIO analysis of Ohio level data confirms this. The data on the next few slides is from the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System, which again asks adults questions about their childhood. This chart shows the percentage of Ohio adult respondents who said that they had a caring adult in their home who made them feel safe and protected. And then also shows the percentage with an adult who made sure their basic needs were met. And we've broken this data down based on the number of ACEs experienced. Unfortunately, we see that those Ohioans who reported more ACEs exposure were less likely to report having this type of caring adult in their home during childhood. However, our analysis showed that having a safe and caring adult at home mitigated the negative health impacts of ACEs. This slide shows that those who experienced 2 or more ACEs were much less likely to report smoking and depression in adulthood if they had an adult who made them feel safe and protected during childhood. So to go over an example here, of those who experienced 2 or more ACEs and reported never having an adult who made them feel safe and protected, or only having this type of caregiver a little bit of the time during childhood, 49% reported having depression versus only 26% of those who reported having this type of caregiver all of the time. This chart is very similar, but shows smoking and depression rates based on how much of their childhood people reported having an adult in the household who tried hard to make sure their basic needs were met. Again, we see the lowest rates of those negative health outcomes among people who reported having this type of caregiver all of the time. These findings really demonstrate the importance of these critical relationships and suggest that improving a parent or caregiver's ability to provide for and protect their children can give children a strong start in life and improve overall population health in the long term. But stressors and adversity experienced by some parents and caregivers, such as living in poverty or lacking access to safe and affordable housing, can undermine their ability to provide this secure, healthy, and nurturing family environment. As June had mentioned, supportive relationships outside of the family, such as with teachers or neighbors, can also be protective and support well-being. Similar to parents, it's important to support professionals like early childhood educators so that they can effectively support and take care of the children in their care, such as through increasing compensation, offering more workplace benefits, and other supports that they may need in the classroom. And I know this is definitely a policy priority for Groundwork Ohio. Finally, certain individual skills can also contribute to improved well-being throughout a person's life. The skills and competencies listed on this slide, which children can begin developing in early childhood, have evidence of being effective individual level protective factors. They foster resilience, which is the ability to successfully and positively adapt to challenging or threatening circumstances. The ability to develop these skills, however, really largely depends on the existence of those interpersonal and community level protective factors that we described just now. Children who have experienced ACEs and trauma also tend to have more difficulty building these individual protective factors, partially due to changes in the brain caused by trauma. Social and emotional instruction in classrooms can really support children in developing these skills in early childhood and throughout their kindergarten through 12th grade education. As June already pointed out, the brief also includes evidence-based policy options to promote protective factors at the community, interpersonal, and individual levels. June already mentioned a few at the societal and community level, but I'm going to give a few quick examples at the interpersonal level. Evidence-based home visiting, of course, can be very helpful in supporting parents and caregivers, teaching them about child development and helping them build those safe, stable, and nurturing home environments that are so valuable. Governor DeWine has proposed another increase in allocations for evidence-based home visiting in this budget, which I know Groundwork Ohio also supports. Also, parent, caregiver, and family skills training programs like Triple P, can increase parent and caregivers' understanding of child development and positive behavioral management strategies. there is strong evidence that these group-based programs can improve child behavior and parenting, and also that they reduce stress, depression, and anxiety for parents and caregivers, and increase feelings of self-efficacy, which enables them to be that steady, nurturing caregiver for their children. So in conclusion, remember that the negative outcomes associated with ACEs are not inevitable. Protective factors such as having a stable, nurturing caregiver can make a world of difference. Budget time is an ideal time to advocate for policy changes, to foster supportive communities, and build protective factors for children and their caregivers. A few specific examples we mentioned included the child tax credit, supporting early childhood educators, and increasing appropriations for home visiting. So please take a look at the policy brief if you'd like any additional policy recommendations. We just touched on a few, but that's all we have. So now June and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Becky and June. And we do already have a question in the chat, a great question from Shelley. What is the age range when we're referring to childhood in this report specifically, when referencing ACEs? Is it just early childhood? Is it up to 18? If you could share about that.
Yeah, I can take that one. So when we think about ACEs, it really spans childhood. So 0 to 18.
Thank you. And also thank you. I was just struck. I knew there was a very clear connection between ACEs prevention and a lot of the investments that we're advocating for in the budget. But my gosh, that list of supporting the child tax credit, supporting expansion of child care subsidies, it just lined up so much with our policy agenda. So thank you for bringing that home too. Are there other questions on the chat? We've got a ton of folks on the line today, and you can feel free to unmute and hop off camera if you like, or put things in the chat, and I'm happy to help facilitate as well. And while folks are thinking, I'll ask, I know last year outside of budget legislation, there had been a bill, I think House Bill 352, that would have created an ACEs study commission. We haven't seen anything like that yet this GA. Are there other bills outside of budget that we should be monitoring and having folks keep an eye on that might impact the ACEs work as well?
Well, I also haven't seen that bill be reintroduced, but I know that it was introduced in the last two General Assemblies, and last GA, one of the primary sponsors was Representative Rachel Baker, and I do think she has a real interest in this area, so I would expect her to reintroduce that. So that's one to be watching for. I mean, I think any legislation that's going to bring attention to these issues is important. I'm also going to be really interested to watch in the budget, and then if it isn't successful in the budget, to see what Andrea White does with the rest of the provisions of House Bill 7 from last GA, because there were a lot of provisions in there that were evidence-based that would help to build these protective factors. So those are the two that jump out to me. June, do you have anything else to add? Any others you've noticed?
Nothing else to add that I can think of, no.
Thank you. Well, we'll definitely be monitoring for those as well. And as you know very well, Becky, sometimes things get amended into the budget bill during this season too. So we'll keep an eye out for language changes in each version of the budget that might have some of the content from those bills this GA. We've got not a question, but a comment from someone in the chat. They appreciated your mention of the importance of home visitation, which is another program where we are very supportive of, and glad to see Chris Burns will be testifying next week from the business viewpoint. So thank you for raising your voice and advocating for the importance of home visiting, which is critical for service coordination and identification of needs in that space for young children and their families. We've got 1 minute left if anybody wants to chime in. And we have Becky and June's slides, so we'll go ahead and send that link out with the recording, as we always do, very likely in our newsletter this week, and again next week in our reminder about next week's session, which will be around social media. Becky and June, thank you so much. This work is so important, and we are so grateful to have you as a partner. HPIO is critical in completing our data dashboard. We love working with them, and the research that you put together is so critical to our advocacy work. So thank you for being such mission-driven and just wonderful partners to work with.
Thank you. Thank you for having us today.
Yeah, have a great morning and stay warm, everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Thanks.